Wonderful. I see people from the hallways joining us in for this presentation. So we're going to start in around 30 seconds, so you can make your way to find maybe share, joining us for our session. All right, well, welcome everyone to our session today. And my name is Matthew. I'm a volunteer at the Indigenous Physical Activity and Cultural Circle. And before we begin, for the people on Zoom, just a reminder to have your cameras off and be muted. And it's lovely to see everyone this afternoon who is here in person. So today I will be introducing Brian Rice. Brian Rice has traveled the world to 15 and presenting to Indigenous people. Brian has taught Native studies, religion and cultural studies, education studies, and ecology, and recreational management studies, and currently works at the University of Manitoba. Brian will be giving a talk on how our lives can be transformed by living a more healthy lifestyle, and how just because we age doesn't mean we have to stop doing physical activity. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My name is Brian, and I'm an Indigenous land-based educator. I bring my students outdoors to historical and cultural life in the territory I work. And sometimes we camp out, sometimes we do a little bit of canoeing, but usually it's a long walk. And one of the reasons I do that is I want my students to be healthy. And I spent a lot of years in classrooms trying to get away from classrooms. And I'm still in a classroom, after all these years. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about more about what I do. So I do a lot of history and such. And you see, I was here in 1970. I was 15 years old. I had come with a family member who knew I was failing in school, and he had been in the Navy in World War II. And his best friend basically ran the I guess it was a cooking school at Malafina College. So I got the tour and everything else, and I was a reasonably pretty healthy young person at that time. 15, I was doing a lot of martial arts, and doing as about as good as I guess I could, at that particular age, except for school. I couldn't take school. From very early time that I started with education in school, I would just be dreaming all the time, and I could never concentrate. I could never get through any of it hardly, and that's why I left. I went to an alternative school for a while. It was called the Montreal Canadian School. It was run by hippies and such, and I just could not cope with being stuck in one place for hours and hours and not even really being there. And I think a lot of our young people probably face that same kind of issue. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart or because I wasn't capable. I just wasn't interested. And probably that lack of interest, resulted in me getting into if you want to say, kind of not a very productive lifestyle. At about 17 years old, it was a big moment for me. There was a University, Concordia University in Montreal. I was 17, they were having a beer bash there. I was still in high school, and I got in a fight on the 7th floor of that university campus And it was the most exciting moment in my life. My dad was a original Army Ranger right from the very beginning. He was one of the very first. And my uncles, they were in the airborne in World War II, highly decorated. Another one was in the gliders, and they were Mohawk iron workers, and they were tough men. And I revered my dad, except for my dad had a lot of PTSD and a lot of personal failures because of that, because of his experience in the war. And so he left us for about 7 years, and then he came back into my life about the same time this was happening in 1970 when I was out here. He started to come back into my life. I wanted to be like him. But you see, my dad was a man who had 36 killed in World War II, and had once taken apart a police station, and he was only 5'5". And because he had been a war hero, he got away with a lot of that kind of stuff. Because in the U.S., I was born in Buffalo, New York, to Mohawk iron workers, and because because of his experiences in war, he often got away with those things only because he was so revered for his military service. He was highly decorated, plus he had gotten, like, congratulations, got the keys to the city of Buffalo. That looks like my mic has gone off. Right? Hello? It's good? Okay. Yeah, okay. Anyway, yeah, so around 1972, I got into that fight, and then I met a bunch of guys. 1973, I went to visit my dad, and the guys that I was hanging around with at that time were criminals, pretty much. And when you're with criminals and people who are selling a lot of drugs and everything else, it's always a me kind of thing going on. And I went from, like I said, a pretty reasonably decent person to basically my life really going down kind of the pits. And I knew it. I knew it by the time I was 18. I graduated high school in 1973. And I knew that my life, was taking kind of a different turn. But it was something I also wanted. I think a lot of it had to do with me reconnecting with my dad, me wanting to be like him. But he was getting sober and he was getting well, and I was getting unhealthy. I came to California and basically got thrown out of California because of drunkenness. I was 18 years old, and I ended up coming for the second time to Vancouver. And I stayed a little while and seemed like life was getting better. And then I went back home, and my very first night we had a fight with a biker gang, the people that I knew, and that was the end. That was the beginning, really, of the end for the next 7 years. It was alcohol, drugs, fighting, just not being capable of functioning. I had a friend ask me one time, Brian, why did you hang around with those guys? And I said, because everything was free. I wasn't a person that could drive a car or anything else or steal a car or that, but I was always in with that group, right? And 1977, I tried the geographical cure, and I came back out to Vancouver, and once again, total failure. And then I started to struggle with mental illness by about 1978, 79. I started to struggle with mental illness, where I started to hallucinate and everything else. And, I knew my life was probably pretty close to being over, just because of what was happening, at that time. What really began to make the transformation for me was my brother, Mike, who was passed on now. We were in a car, and we were driving home. And he started to get on me for some of the things that I had done. And I grabbed the wheel, and we almost went over a cliff. And he was able to stop the car, and we got into a big fight. And he got the better of me, which never happened before, or wouldn't have happened, in the past. And I was totally crushed. I was totally broken in a sense, because I knew this was the end. It was going either one way or the other. And in 1981, I finally, with all of these things, struggles and that, I started to get basically healthy for the first time. I started to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and those types of things. And they started to carry me through to a more healthy life. It was a struggle mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually for a long time for me, because I was still struggling with a lot of mental issues. And within about a year, they evaporated. And I started to, I guess, go back to school. I started to achieve. I always had opportunities because of my band, because my band would always support me. And you got to remember, back in those days, when you were a First Nation person, and it was with Indian Affairs back in the 70s, it was unlimited. I mean, you could fail any course, and I'd go, François Martin, okay, I want to take this, and and then they turned it over to the bands, and then everything started getting cut, eh? But I went through that process, eh? So I was a total failure in that. But when I came back, I started to seed a little bit, and it was hard because I get C's and I get D's, maybe a B here and such, eh? But at the same time, the one thing that I had going for me was physical activity, because like I said, when I was 15 years old, I was quite, involved with a lot of different things and such, and different physical activities like jujitsu and all this kind of stuff, right? And I like to run. I think I got that from my dad. The one good thing I really got from my dad was because he was in the military, he had that kind of mindset, eh? And same with my uncles, eh? So I started to get myself back into condition. Within a few years, I decided, well, one day I was going to run a marathon. In 5 months, I ran a 3-hour, 10-minute marathon. I would have had 3 hours if it wasn't for the fact that I had stomach cramps. I wasn't in the greatest shape. But I started doing marathon running and such, and I was succeeding in school. I wasn't finding work permanent in that right away, but eventually I ended up being a gym teacher in a First Nation school up in the north. And that was a really important moment in my life, because I'd never really worked before. Trying to wake up on a Monday morning was like almost impossible, because Monday was probably another day of drinking or so, or drugging and whatever. But regardless, things started to really improve. First time in my life I had money. I guess that was about almost at that time, close to 29, 30 years old or so. I had a few years of sobriety and such before I got this job. And it was a great experience to be up in the north with the kids and everything else, I still have kids back from the 1980s who are on my Facebook page, who are still, it's a beautiful thing when somebody tells you that how much they cared about you when you were there, and that's like, you haven't seen it in 35, 40 years or so. It's a beautiful thing. I was running at that time. I do 20-mile runs, back home and such, right? So I was in pretty good shape and such while I was a physical ed teacher. My life kind of changed a little more when I got a job in Native Studies at in Sudbury. And I also got involved in a PhD program at McGill University in education. And that was a big climb for me. But when I was at McGill University and I was doing my studies, I couldn't find any Indigenous focused courses. And so basically, I was once again in that kind of phased out, like I was when I was a kid, listening to the prof, having my head out the window and just kind of wishing I wasn't there. And that was, it was a great thing. Here I am, I've come from this kind of lifestyle. Now I'm in a PhD program and I didn't know what to do with it. I had a friend, a colleague, and he gave me a talk one time, and he says, you know, there's this new program in California. It's called the Traditional Knowledge Program, and it's an all-Indigenous program. And I was thinking, you know, like about the possibilities, and I called the directors and said, yeah, you know, we really like to have you, and you can still have your job in Native Studies, but we'll do our residencies over in California. But if you can get the time from your work, you know, you'll be able to, you know, come and it was the best thing that ever happened in my life. We had residencies in the redwood forests of Northern California, so we were never sequestered in a classroom. It was a beautiful thing. We had elders come in from California and different places, and they would be our teachers. We had Indigenous students from Alberta, from Métis, Cree, Yakima from Washington, Indigenous students from all over. It was a small group, but nonetheless from all over Ojibwe, all kinds of different Indigenous, you know, folks who were in the same position as I was. And we do our residencies there, and then we do our work when we got back, our doctoral work. And this was another big thing that happened in my life. Was we went from a university program that was in the redwood forests of California, and we made a decision that we weren't going to stay there. We were going to start to go to different places to be with elders and such in their territory. And so that started a whole new phase of my life, which I've never stopped. I continue to travel to different places throughout the world to talk to Indigenous peoples about Canada, about colonialism, all of these types of things. So it's like something I've never really stopped doing. But we went to like Hawaii a few times, Mexico. We had one up in Lapland, northern Norway. I actually did my oral presentation for my dissertation defense in Senegal, Africa, at a conference of voodoo healers and Western African doctors trying to deal with the AIDS epidemic. And so all of these kind of really exciting things were happening. But the key for me was my mentor and my elder. I made a decision early on that I wasn't going to start taking workshops and everything else, trying to do academic stuff. I wanted to learn about the history of my people and about the culture of my people. And the best that it ever was for a long time anyway, he's passed on now, was Jake Thomas. Jake Thomas was the Cayuga elder of the Six Nations, and he was the reciter of the Great Law of Peace. And I would go down and I would listen to him recite the story of the peacemaker and Hiawatha and Jabunsa and all of those kind of stories for 9 days, because he would do 9 days recital. He did that up to his 70s before he had a heart attack and he passed away. But I would go every year and I traveled with him and I learned the stories. And I said, well, what I'm going to do for my dissertation is I'm going to walk that story. Everybody knows the story, but the problem is nobody's been to those places because most of us were displaced of our homelands. So we had never been in any of those particular areas, or many of us had never been in those areas where our people had originally came from. And so I went over to Six Nations, and Jake had a sweat lodge for me. He gave me a bunch of wampum beads. And this is actually the wampum belt that Jake Thomas used to use when he recited the Great Law. We call it the Gaswanta or the two-row wampum. And it represents a relationship that as Haudenosaunee or Iroquoian peoples we were to have with the Dutch when they first came about 1614, which is they would sail in their boat and we would sail in our canoe and we would walk side by side, or travel side by side, I should say, and we would never interfere with one another. And so this is the belt that he would use when he would recite the Great Law. And so it's a very, very important representation for our people. And a lot of people have heard it and have heard about it now anyway. But I made a decision that I was going to walk that story. And so he set me up with medicines and everything else. When I began to walk, I started near Kingston, Ontario, and I went into central New York where our people used to be. And I walked for over a month. I walked that story. I knew that story and I knew the places. But now because I had traveled with Jake and his wife before in a group together, and so I started going back to all those places. Every day I would do ceremony. Every day I would put tobacco down and I would pray, for safety and those types of things. And I kept going. And so out of that came my book, the Road de Shoni, Traditional Iroquois History of Traditional Iroquois History through the eyes that Onhiwago and Switzera, who was our twins in our creation story and such, and my dissertation. But I've never stopped, and that's the thing. See, I had the ability of being a marathon runner, and I thought when I was already in my 40s when that happened. I just started getting in my 40s, and I thought maybe I could do a marathon every day. But it didn't happen. My body started to break down because when I used to train 23 miles sometimes every second day. So I go for a 23-mile run every second day, and it takes a toll on your knees. Believe me, after a little while. But I got into more and more into academia. Like I said, I did all of these things in academia. I've been in all of these programs, but I was missing something, eh? The big thing that I was missing was being outside again, because my dissertation work was all about being outside and being in historical cultural places. And so I had been 15 years teaching in education, Indigenous focus courses, and I looked at an ad and it said, well, we're looking for somebody to do land-based stuff. And nobody really knew much about what it was. They just put land-based stuff in kinesiology and rec management. And that was about 4 years ago. And that's how I kind of got involved in that. And so I set up my courses with the ideas that I had understood and I had developed through my walk. So I said, we're not just gonna go sit in an auditorium, and listen, because I did a lot of that, and it's a great thing when you have elders and such to be able to teach you. But, I said, we're going to do this all outside. So since that time, we do campouts, and I wake up my students to watch the sunrise come up in the morning, just so they understand what that feel is, that transformation that takes place. We go to walks to different historical, cultural places in the territory that I live. One of the difficult things is I've never been able to teach courses like that in my own territory. But regardless, I know that history. I know, I've made sure to know as much as I can about those places and the people around those places, and the people who were, and some of them were our people. And our Ganyangge Haga, our Mohawk people. And so I bring them to all of these places, and we do a lot of different cultural, traditional things. But the most important thing for me is the health aspect. One of the things about us is we were the healthiest people in the world, and I know that. Even my dad, when he was working iron, when he was doing that kind of work, walking 40 floors up on beams and those types of things. They would climb up on beams. They had no safety harnesses and those types of things. They were among the healthiest people in the world. And when we were doing traditional activities of Ganyangge Haga, we were among the most healthiest people in the world. Because we traveled all throughout Canada and upper North America during the fur trade and such. And that's why I brought you this to see. This is my fur trade pipe. It's over 200 years old. This pipe went all the way to Montana, starting around 1800. And it was smoked by the Ganyangge Haga fur traders when they settled around Montana and those types of places. And I still use it for my own ceremonies and these types of things. I gave up my Sundance pipe because a friend had died, and I wanted to give it back to the family. He had given it to me, and I gave it back to him. So this has been my key pipe since that time, and it's the pipe of my ancestors. One of the things that, like I said, I still do is really talk about history, health, and those types of things. My wife used to always say, I'd love to live in Victoria, I'd love to live in Vancouver Island and such. And I would say to her, yeah, but I have no connection there. I have no history, the people who are here, the people who are here and such, and they've got their own cultures and everything else. And there's no history of my Haga people here. And so, we'd always avoid it, no, I'm not going to go to Vancouver, I'm not going to go to Victoria. I lived here before, I was on the street, pretty much at one time. And, there was really not much for me. But as a land-based educator, it's up to me to find out, is or was or could be there be a place for me in here. And so I started to look around about Nanaimo. Like I said, I was here in 1970. And I know the traditional people here, the coastal Salish, this is their territory. But what I discovered was there's a falsification of history here as well. Indigenous history of those who came here and contributed to this place. I was reading, about Nanaimo before I came, and it was a bunch of French guys came from Quebec or something, and they built the bastion or whatever they call it, here and such. And that's a false history. I'm going to read you something, okay? I normally don't use paper, but I'm going to do it because it's new, more new for me as well. So everybody knows James Douglas. James Douglas was the first governor of the island here. He came up from Fort Vancouver, and he came up at around 1846. The reason he came up here was because the border of Oregon was set between British North America and Oregon. So anybody who wasn't from that area traditionally had to move. So James Douglas came up and he became chief Hudson's Bay factor here on the island, and then eventually, of course, the governor. I don't know if everybody knows that James Douglas was half black. His mom was from Guyana, South America, and he married a Cree woman from Norway House in Manitoba. And that's probably one of those things that you don't hear a lot about when you talk about James Douglas here is, was the fact that he was biracial and actually had connections to the Indigenous community. His own wife was a Cree woman. He commissioned a bunch of guys to come up to Nanaimo in 1853. And I'm going to name you those guys. Lazard Onyesta. Now I looked at the word Onyesta, and it means Lazard corn. Ignace Garohuane. Garohuane means the river. Thomas Sego Yawata. Sego Yawata means red jacket. They arrived here in August. They built the coal miners' homes here. September 9th. Then in April 3rd, 1853, Louis Odia Goria arrived. The next year, Francois Satagarata, then Lazard, Thomas, Ignace, and Louis built the bastion, intended for defense and still standing. Toma was also involved. They were all recorded in Joseph McKay's journal, who was head of the project, the Nanaimo project. And I don't know if anybody has ever talked about the Mohawks from Ganawagi who came here and helped build this place, including the bastion, which is still standing here. Another one was Jacques, they call Jacques Iroquois, and he married Margaret of the Sioux people, and they went down to the Willamette Valley, and they came back. She was raped, along with her friend, by two white men, and it was one of the most important cases in Victoria because it's the first time an Indigenous woman had taken white men to court. She lost the case. She was the chief. She was the chief, basically the chief's niece. And so when they went back, there are still people in Souk who have Mohawk ancestry from Ganawage. Louis Odia Goria ended up marrying the chief's daughter, the Kwakatol, and the Alexis family are rooted to that, and they are rooted to the Mohawk people. It doesn't make this territory my territory. It means I actually have connection here. I actually have a historical connection. It's what I do. It's what I look for. I look for historical connection to my people, you know? So now I have a better sense of my being here. I'm not just a stranger. My people were here. My people may even shared, you know, who knows, bread with some of the indigenous people at that time when they were coming up here, you know, and so, you know, that's the beautiful thing about being healthy. It's a beautiful thing about, you know, being capable of doing things like this. I'm suffering right now from a condition that I get spasms in my heart, okay, sometimes. And I've gone to the doctors, and they kind of given me the test and everything else, but they can't find anything. And one of the reasons why they can't find anything is because it's hard to go to the hospital and ask for a test and saying you're not feeling well after you've done a 7-mile run the day before. So they look at me and they see me, you're too healthy, you know, but I still have this thing, you know, so I can't fix it. But in a sense, I'm fixing it because I'm staying healthy. And that's what it means, you know, I'm 68 years old. So what I'm trying to say, and I try and say this all the time to young people, especially people trying to get sober and all that, is like, you're just starting your life, man. Like I used to sit in a bar, I would be with somebody with 20 years old, and they would say, I remember when I used to be a hockey player. I remember when I used to play football, when I was a good athlete and everything else. That's 20, 21 years old. And that's the way I was. I don't think like that. I think about what I can do, what I can be today. You know, I'm never going to run a marathon again because I don't want to. And plus, you know, it's I can't run like I used to. But I still go out for 6, 7 miles, you know, for a very slow run. I go at night sometimes. I'm on paths. I see animals. I see wildlife. I see all kinds of different things, you know. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's what I'm trying to get my students, you know, to start doing as well. I bring them out snowshoeing. Sometimes we'll go up a mountain or a hill or whatever it is, you know, that's going to keep us healthy, but also keep us rooted, eh? Keep us rooted historically and culturally to the places that we are at. Anyway, I'm going to go for a run today or tomorrow probably, and I'm going to go up to that bastion because I want to see it, because I know, you know, now there's a place in a sense for me at that bastion. And so I'm a bit tired because our WestJet flights were all canceled. So I got in about 1 or 2 in the morning there last night, and so when I woke up, you know, I said, "Oh, it's gonna be 5 hours, got to sleep," and you know, such. But you know, I want to just thank the people here for bringing me out into that beautiful ocean, which was amazing, honestly. What an experience! What a life experience for me. And so, and I want to thank you all too for being here. Yawagoa, Onigiwaki, yeah.
Chris, if you are okay with this, we have time for some questions.
Sure, no worries. Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions, we can start a discussion. Yes, please go ahead. You might have to yell, or you can come closer.
Where I'm working.
Yeah, now I work at University of Manitoba, but I used to work in a community called the Winneway, which was at Anishinaabe near northwestern Quebec. Not that far north.
I think something that you had mentioned was when you now have these shared experiences with your students. I'm curious if they have also gone through paths similar to yours or a bit different, and how you can sort of bring your life and your teachings to them.
Yeah, I do some work at the University of Peace Costa Rica, and I have a student who's walking through her own territory right now. And so she every once in a while she'll text me or something, just tell me how she is. But it's, you know, it's that idea of really having that relationship in unique ways with the land that you live on, eh? And like, you know, I understand the whole school system is the way it is and everything else, and I'm not going to knock it all because, you know, it has some benefits, but, you know, it's like, you know, the young people have to have that sense, you know, that this has meaning for them, eh? Like where I am too, you know, that it has meaning for them. And that's what I'm really trying to instill is the meaning, you know, the fact that it has meaning, eh? It's not something to verbalize or whatever. It's that touch, that feel, it's that knowing you're in the places of your ancestors, eh? And that's really what it's about. One of the beautiful things that happened with my work was I got a call 2 years later after my walk by the elders, and they asked me if I could take them on their own journeys or help facilitate journeys. And so we took 9-day journeys. Because they were older, they were going to walk everywhere. But the point is, you know, they had that experience of being on their land, eh? So you know, that's how something that really has good has come of it, eh?
Well, thank you so much for sharing today and traveling this way. So on behalf of Indigenous and Cultural Circle, thank you so much for traveling here. And we'd like to give you a token of appreciation. Coach, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, so have a lovely day. We have around 15 minutes left for the other session comes down. We have door prizes and then give away 6 t-shirts and blankets. And then we'll be doing our closing ceremony and Sean Hannah. Oh yeah, if you need a raffle ticket, please go get one. I know it's great to network while you're here and meet people and get inspired. So please connect. I just wanted to show you that in June, I'm hosting the National Indigenous Community Awareness Week for a year. The national campaign will partner with King Health Institute. Hopefully you can join us out. Just be back in the room at 4:30. Thank you.